everybody. Welcome to the Heady Chronicle show. I'm your host, Dan Ulloa. I'm also the editor of HeadyNJ.com. So on Heady NJ, we cover cannabis news of the great state of New Jersey, of politics, business, and culture. So with our show, we're trying a new format as like a video show versus me being like a writer. So it's interesting that way, and we're trying to go a little more national with things. I'm learning a lot adventure here. I got this microphone going. I got my office set up like a studio. I'm trying here, guys. We're working on the camera. Hopefully, you guys like the picture. That way. So hopefully, and we have a guest for our new show here. So I want to welcome. Now here we have the Last Prisoner Project Director of Strategics and the Latino Cannabis Alliance Vice President Jason Ortiz.
Yeah, right on, Dan. Thanks for having me. It's a long time coming. Excited to be your first video guest. I brought all my extra color so that way people can appreciate the video.
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt. Yeah, we've done a few episodes. This might be around like the 19th episode, 18th episode. It's like a weird thing. I was trying to do it like every couple months. Now I'm trying to get into like every week or like couple weeks. With like guys to do like my own like talking head show is always like an interesting thing. Like the whole format thing. I'll be like disclosure here. Like I'm a writer here trying to like, figure out things. Like a writer, you just like behind like the keyboard, type in. We're sending out pictures. Sometimes I'm in and out of events, but like here we got like a little more color, and a little time to talk about things. And yeah, definitely been Facebook friends and seeing like your good work in the movement. So yeah, so tell us about yourself.
Sure. So yeah, again, my name is Jason Ortiz. I'm the Director of Strategic Initiatives for the Last Prisoner Project, and LPP is an organization that's founded in 2019 to help everyone that is incarcerated for cannabis crimes achieve their freedom, get reunited with their families, and become full members of society, including the wonderful movement to legalize cannabis nationwide. And over the years, we've helped hundreds of folks shorten their sentences. We provide legal support, financial support for folks that are inside through their commissary, and then also support as they get out once they actually are free. And so we've provided millions of dollars in like pro bono legal support. I think we're up to over 400 years that we've given back to folks since we started. Yeah, it's pretty good. I mean, it is always like sort of like a bittersweet where people are getting sentenced to ridiculous penalties, and the fact that we exist, is sucks. But I'm glad to be doing this work. But right now, we still have folks that are serving life sentences in prison. There are folks that got, 40, 50 years in the 90s that are still locked up. There are over 3,000 federal cannabis prisoners, and it can be a bit difficult to get the exact number because folks are coming in and out. And sadly, we're not going to get to the last prisoner until we stop putting people in prison. And so that's why we're here to both help on the actual clemency side of it, but also we work to legalize and decrim nationwide. And just so folks know, clemency is a broad term for a few different types of actions that help folks relieve the penalty that they got when they got in trouble for a cannabis crime. And so the gold standard is what's called a commutation. And a commutation is where we shorten the sentence of the person to time served. And so say someone's already spent 20 years in prison, then they would have, like their sentence shortened to 20 years, and then they would become free. And so it's not an admission, it's not a claim of innocence, right, which a lot of other criminal justice work is. It's like, yeah, they did that, but they should have gotten a much shorter penalty, especially now that cannabis has become de facto legal at the state level in over half the country, just about. Or I should say half the people in the country live in a state where cannabis is legal, because there's actually one state short, 25, which is where we exactly have. And so that's a commutation, again, is shortening their sentence. We also do work on expungements to erase records so folks don't continue to have to deal with penalties of an arrest. And we also work on lots of other things like shortening probation and parole, working with different offices, and trying to produce legislation. And so we do a lot of different things. And then, as you mentioned, I am also the newly appointed vice president of the Latino Cannabis Alliance. And LCA is here to sort of bridge the gaps between the Latino community and the cannabis community, and specifically focusing on where both drug policy and things like immigration intersect. And so we were founded after the Glass House raids that happened last year, where you had the DEA and ICE working together to raid a state legal cannabis farm. And when that happened, we were like, we really need to be organizing around this, making connections between the Latino community and the cannabis community, because they're coming for both of us. And the more that we can stick together to push back on this, the better it'll be for all of our communities. And so we formed the Latino Cannabis Alliance. We have an amazing board of folks. New Jersey will be very well aware of our president, Jessica Gonzalez, who is definitely a New Jersey star, I'd say. She's our president. She's definitely focused very heavily on working through immigration issues. She also really wants to focus on building bridges with folks in the Americas and Central and South America. And myself, I work a little bit more on the federal policy side and doing a lot more criminal justice focus. But we also have folks that are in the industry as consultants. We have folks that are documentary filmmakers. We have all kinds of different folks on our board. And so we're really here to start to be that voice for the Latino community, to be able to say this is both how we want to help the cannabis space, but also this is what we expect folks to do to help us as well, seeing as Latinos are a huge chunk of the consumers, the folks that work the fields and the cultivation facilities, and also folks that have been impacted by criminalization. And we want to make sure that as legalization happens, we're also part of the industry as owners and operators. And so there have been some success stories there we could talk about a little bit. I'm super proud to be serving this position. It's a long time coming. It's a bit of a dream come true to be able to pull some of the best and brightest Latino minds together to really start to kick ass in a way that we haven't seen before. And so we have been organizing quite a bit. We did some webinars specifically about how folks that own a cannabis business can support the Latino and immigrant communities in their communities. And then we also had a really good day as part of the Unity Week of Action with a number of other nonprofits, where we were really focused on pushing the MORE Act and specifically encouraging folks that are a part of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus to co-sponsor the MORE Act. The MORE Act is really the only bill that, one, addresses immigration at all, but also has a mechanism for resentencing, so folks that are incarcerated can get free. So we'll be pushing that and a number of other things moving forward. But in both of these roles, I'm very honored and proud and humbled to be able to do this work, and excited to see how we can do it more in New Jersey and everywhere around the country.
Oh, nice. Yes, that's like a lot. So you're doing like a lot. You've been at this like a lot. You're definitely like at the front of this. Like I'm definitely like in here in Jersey, shout out to Jessica. Definitely want to have her on in like an episode that way. Because both like the state and macro like experience is interesting. But like you, so from Connecticut, similar to Jersey, a little farther away, but not too far away. And like
Part of tri-state.
Yeah, no doubt. So like really curious like about like your experiences in like Connecticut cannabis first before we get to like the fucking feds. Good work and shit work, and like the good work of advocates and the shit work of dealing with the fucking feds. So.
And it's a perpetual job. So again, I was born and raised in Connecticut. I got arrested for cannabis possession at 16 in Connecticut. I went to the Norwich Free Academy, and me and two friends were actually walking on the way to school. Some folks called the school and let us know that we were smoking weed on the way to school. And as soon as I got there, they surrounded us with security in like golf carts, and like these big men came and like harassed us. And at the time, I didn't realize like what the big deal was. Right. But when a police officer entered the room later, I realized like, oh, this is escalating. I ended up getting suspended for a full year, and it threw my entire life out of whack. But as I was going through that process, I learned a lot about the system, and I got some time from school to do my own research. And so that's when I learned about things like the war on drugs, the school to prison pipeline, and the phrase that would change my life forever, selective enforcement. And so that is where political machines, both the police, the political apparatus, will over-enforce certain laws for political reasons, to disrupt certain communities, to appear to be tough on crime, to get more votes, right? They have their own reasons, and they will use the criminal justice system to serve those political purposes, not because what I did was like really morally wrong. And so when I realized that that's how politics and the system works, radically changed how I looked at everything. Luckily, I was able to go to the University of Connecticut and graduate there, but only because...
You got Huskies? Nice.
That's right, Huskies, baby. Best college basketball team in the world.
I don't know about that. I went to Syracuse, and we have the Orange Men, so we can agree to disagree.
Y'all can have a moment in the sun for now, but we got the rings to prove it. And so...
We're going to agree to disagree and move on, man.
But I was able to go because other cannabis activists changed the Higher Education Act's federal aid elimination penalty, which was a law that would have prevented me from getting Pell Grants because I had a drug arrest. But because folks changed that law before I went to UConn, and it was only where you would lose the funding if you were already at college, that effort meant everyone that got in trouble in high school could access Pell Grants. I was able to go to college, and I found out about that change when I was part of Students for Sensible Drug Policy as a student. And SSDP also has some strong SSDP chapters in New Jersey. Shout out to Rowan, SSDP. In that effort, I got to see that when we change a policy or implement a policy, a very small change can have a huge impact on a big community. I was part of that community. I was only able to go because advocates had fought for me before I even knew they existed. And so that was the moment where I really became a policy advocate and said, I want to have substantial impact. I want to really be able to change things. And fortunately, I went on to help found the Minority Cannabis Business Association, where we really focused on drafting equity policies. And that experience, I eventually was president, that experience informed when Connecticut started to move towards adult use legalization. I was there to be able to provide support for the governor and actually served on his licensing task force. But also, one of the things we did with MCBA was a decision to write our own laws. And so instead of asking legislators, right, to like get it right or just like this is your job, we brought all the folks together that were our stakeholders, drafted our own legislation, and started to push for that and push the Hispanic, Latino, and African American caucuses to say we're not going to pass legalization without equity. And I think a lot of places did that, New Jersey as well. And again, shout out to folks like Jess and the other folks in New Jersey who really supported equity in that process.
Oh, yeah.
New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut were all going at the same time. So we were all working together to figure out how we can support each other, what examples of policies that they were pushing. And the interesting thing is that while we all went adult use, we're all very different. The definition of equity was different. The definition of what kind of supports that an equity operation would have was very different. The various license types were all over the place, right? But at the end of the day, all three did end up with equity programs. And I think that's a huge testament to our work that like equity became a big deal in that era of like, you're not gonna be able to pass legalization without it. And, you know, definitely an imperfect system. Definitely have all kinds of suggestions, I guess, that would make for Connecticut moving forward. But I did draft HB 6377 with State Representative Robin Porter. That was our labor/equity focused bill that would then go on to be combined with the governor's bill to form a chunk of the legalization effort. And so we can go into a bit more detail on what that was like, but it was, you know, an incredible Herculean effort by so many people to get that bill over the finish line. And again, while it wasn't perfect, we
did a podcast.
And you know, I was happy to move it forward and get the law changed where in the law, folks that were under the age of 18 would no longer be arrested for cannabis possession. And so it was quite literal full circle moment where I was able to undo the law that had impacted me as a youth, and now no one else will have to suffer that way. And so that's just a small example of how paying it forward, right, and being able to change things for other people and why advocacy is important. And I'm super proud of the work that we did there and looking forward to seeing how we can continue to do equity work moving forward in this new era under rescheduling and a lot of other shifts that have happened.
Oh, nice. Oh, you touched on so many things. God damn, there's so much. Yeah, the nature of getting caught sucks. I sort of got caught in New York at college, and there had like that bullshit, and now they got like weed shit with like the fancy fucking stationery of the goddamn state of New York, which was against me. Oh my god! Yeah, you probably had that too. It's always like the thing about getting caught. Like I wasn't like to say like I smoked weed. Like my story and like the nature of that, like it's kind of like I suppose like the thing I took a couple drags in high school but didn't really like it, didn't really keep doing it. It was in college and later that like we had complications and fun, you know. And so it's been like 20 years, you know, rooting for Syracuse and liking weed.
Yeah, I liked weed. I smoked a lot. It was really helpful for me, you know, like as a young man who was going through the trials and tribulations of the late 90s, early 2000s. You know, it wasn't until I was like 16, though. It was like mid-high school that I started to really smoke pretty frequently, I would say, like on the weekends. And it, you know, the whole time I just really didn't see it as that big of a deal. Like it seemed like just about everybody was doing it, and I hadn't really seen anyone get in serious trouble for it, although I didn't know like that it was illegal. But it was something that I loved doing with my friends, and we it really enjoyed it. It brought us together, and I remember back then where it was just like green bud is what they called it. It's like it was either brown or green. Like that was the two types of weed that you could buy in Connecticut, and so like it's such a different world now, and to
Oh
see
yeah.
my daughter is growing up in a place where there's dispensaries, down the road from her, where I was barely able to get a Mexican brick unless I had, extra money.
Oh yeah, no, it's definitely like a thing of like the new era of people like who didn't get caught. And it's like, back in my day, we had to have the shadiest motherfucker ever. We had to go across to the city. It took hours, and then you got terrible weed, but we liked it
Yeah, 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 it's
because
true.
we had
It's a
like,
very different experience.
yeah, like I think I was able to get like you get green weed with no seeds, and then like we're fucking good here, guys. This is awesome. This is green weed with no seeds.
Right, it's
Like
amazing.
even like that's like a fucking low standard there, and like oh my god, yeah. No, so then it's like a whole thing. It's like I don't know what I smoked in 2007 when we got like high as fuck, like watching like Full Metal Jacket and thought the first half was funny. Like
Yeah, no,
have you
I mean, it
ever
was a
joked
different
in that
world.
movie?
And I
Not
actually ended up starting to grow weed because, like, I wasn't finding the type of weed that I wanted. And so I was one of those folks that actually preferred sativa, although that's not really, like a serious term anymore. But, I
yeah,
didn't really like the cannabis that would make me feel tired or make me, like, when I sit on the couch, it wasn't really my thing. I like to party and, and be awake when I was partying. And so eventually I started learning how to grow, and I grew the strains that I really liked, and I was able to share with friends and family. And so, like, I spent a good chunk of my life in the trap, right? Like selling and growing weed. And I had some pretty dangerous experiences, right? Like, it was actually that I had a gun pulled on me was the reason that I went to Yukon eventually. It was part of it, where had done that enough times where I was like, I got to get out of here. And so I think that's an experience that like no one is not no one, but like very, very few people are now gonna have of like the violence that was around not just cannabis, but all illegal drug sales. And that doesn't really exist anymore, right? Until you get to like pretty high scales. And so
yeah.
I think it's important to acknowledge that like, yes, legalization isn't perfect, but we are removing some of the more dangerous aspects of cannabis culture, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, yeah, it's always like the thing of like really getting into like hardcore underground legacy where like where you're really growing and like moving stuff. I might have I was never one for like a green thumb, I may or may have sold some bags to friends, like a few good bags that
There's a
way, it
spectrum,
doesn't make me wouldn't make me Don Pablo, but then it's not nothing and it wasn't what I was taught for. So then it's like a whole thing that way. But definitely understand that and definitely have like talk to guys who like appreciate like sometimes they prefer annoying paperwork to a gun.
Yeah, and there is something about the economics of it, right? That like when you bring cannabis into the legal market, you're changing and you're adding safety and you're adding, controls to make sure folks aren't going to get hurt. And that also means that it's going to be more expensive, right? And so I think now we're kind of going through that adjustment period between the legal market and the unregulated market. And there's what the arbitrage, right, which is like the inflation of the price basically because it's criminal, right? And so there is that extra amount of profit that comes around something that is dangerous to move. And so when you move it into the legal market, you reduce that, right? Now it's a matter of volume and you're trying to
Oh,
reduce
it's such a good point. It's such a
Yeah,
good
and
point. Like
so that
this thing is illegal, so even at like to say you always hear people, oh, the dispensary is too expensive. I want my legacy weed, underground legacy weed, street weed, it's cheaper. And then you're like, even that might have the inflated cost of like being illegal. So that's always like the thing of like the nature of price, nature of quality cannabis, the nature of allegedly quality cannabis being sold for a high price, the nature of like
sure.
cheap cannabis. And sometimes normies just want like a little weed. The newbies like a little weed, they'll take the MSL packaging that's like not too like crazy and like, that works for them. And it's like, okay, we can make that work. We also have like our heads who appreciate, legacy to legal stuff, who appreciate, cleverness, who appreciate, quality craft cannabis, good weed, fire weed, depending on where you are in your slang.
Yeah, and as a grower, right? Like, there's also there are strains that are more profitable than others, right? And so
Oh, that's a
like
big issue too. Yeah, we definitely have that among our patients. To say like green crack is like a terrible name, it's supposed to have good properties from my conditions.
Yeah, and that's the thing, like especially your higher energy sativas, right, produce a lot less than the sort of couch lock indicas. And again, I'm using these terms as, like easy way to explain things. I think most folks understand what I'm saying, but are not scientific at all, right? But
Yeah, yeah,
produce more, right? Like the indicas. And so for a company that's trying to stay in business, especially in the legal market, like their margins are getting squeezed. And so they have to find the products that are going to be profitable. And so that is one thing that like in the craft space, a lot of folks grow because they love it, they like that strain, they have particular people they're growing for, and you can adjust prices and things like that, of course, in all markets. But that's the reality is that some of them are going to be more profitable than others. So of course, corporate cannabis is going to focus on those particular strains and the people that like those strains. And so as a grower, though, I really enjoyed being like, I want to grow whatever I want. And this is what I really appreciate. Red Dragon was a big strain that I loved growing many times. That was Barney's Farm. Shout out to Barney's Farm. But it was really like nourishing for me to be able to decide like what I wanted to grow and share it with folks for free and all these kind of things that's just lost, right? Like in the corporate side of things. But that's why I think there will always be a craft industry, right? There's always people that are going to be, you know, interested in growing the best cannabis regardless of the price or the profitability of it. And we saw that like in Northern California, right? We saw lots of places that are just like growing better weed. And now as access is increasing, right, it will become more of an art form, right, to grow that type of cannabis. And so I don't ever see it disappearing completely, but it's definitely going to be in competition with now mass volume grows that are there for, like you were saying before, most people don't want the highest, strongest, very specific strain, right? There are many, and many patients specifically, right? Medical patients deserve very particular strains so that it makes sense for what they're dealing with. But the general public just wants cannabis that they're going to feel better after they take it, right? And so all of these people will have different types of ways that they're served by the cannabis space. And I think that's okay, right? Like we do want to eliminate things like mold or violence or people potentially getting something that is not what they want or they're just kind of buying something they don't know what they're getting at all. So there's a lot of things that I think the regulated market does solve for. It also solves for the people that don't have a social network where they know where to go get it on the street, right? So say you're senior citizens. They're not senior citizens are going to go out and party and try to find somebody that they can find to connect where they can go to the dispensary down the road and say, hey, this is what my doctor said about this. What do you think works for me? It's going to be very different than the experience on the street. And so I think we're seeing all of these different types of consumers finding different ways to access the products that make sense for them. And I think that's a beautiful thing.
nice. Yeah. Oh man, there's on so many issues there. Right. We definitely have like the gardener who likes to garden, and unfortunately, home gardening in the garden state is illegal. And that's like a whole
Right.
thing we
Okay.
have. Yeah.
I want to talk about that quickly too, right? And like one of the things that I found fascinating about the developments between Connecticut, New York, and New Jersey, right, was that each state focused on different parts of the industry more, and that was reflected in what their actual industry looks like. So Connecticut, we put home grow at the top of the list, and we considered home grow part of equity, right? And so it was kind of non-negotiable. However, New Jersey didn't spend as much time on home grow, but your industry support is way better. And so there was a lot more effort on training programs. Yes, yes, like without a doubt. And a lot more access and support systems for the business operators, education for the public, right? Like there are a lot of things in New Jersey that are better than Connecticut. Our social equity council also hasn't really released most of the funds that got set aside for community improvement grants, although it is moving forward a little bit more now. And then New York had a very wide definition of equity where they included folks like veterans and women and farmers, right? So distressed farmers are part of the equity program in New York, where Connecticut didn't even consider that, right? Until much later when I had
Weed farmers are just some like jerk off who's got like some fucking crop and probably doesn't even like weed, like in the worst case
I'm not a
scenario.
huge fan of that definition, but it is the definition that was agreed to, right? But
Yeah,
for me,
that
it
was the
was
thing.
overly
Yeah.
broad.
Yeah, that's interesting to say like what state did what better. Yeah, no, home grow like we definitely had like all these fucking MSOs and a lot of people that wanted to make money, and it was easier to say here's like an Hispanic guy that wants to make money, a black guy that wants to make money, as well as like a soulless corporation that wants to make money on weed, and like that works. Versus like home grow has always been very home gardening is very difficult. The fucking name home grow is difficult because we're talking about gardening, and gardening is not growing. And this is what they always fucking said is that the gardeners would be growing like they were like a fucking company. Versus like I'm trying like versus we have like Andrea Rabel, is definitely like invigorate the movement. To talk about like to say like she wants to grow for her condition specifically. To say like this is like the adult use market is like the over the counter OTC like health market, and it is for me. But like the very and like I got chronic conditions, she has very severe conditions. And wants like even more specific things. So that's like really difficult. And yeah, that's so interesting. Like comparing the states and say like that was really at like the forefront of Connecticut versus like I guess like fighting the MSOs. Like you have like the two fronts, and like I guess at one point we were able to just find more support for like like small business people here. And then that's interesting infrastructure. I guess of the industry you were saying
Sure.
education. Like we've like and now it's 2026 AD. We're talking about like fights that happened in 2019, almost 2020 during
Yeah.
COVID, 2021,
Exactly.
2022, getting out of COVID and like into the market and like the CRC getting established and then right. So that's always like the thing is comparing and contrasting. So we have the Cannabis Regulatory Commission, and which includes the board and the agency. And in New York, they're separate, where you have the Cannabis Control Board is the board, and then the OCM, Office of Cannabis Management, is the agency. And I guess they work sort of together. But like, how does it work
One
in
is
Connecticut?
advisory. So one is making recommendations, one is doing implementation, right? And so the boards are there to review the situation and then go to the legislature and say like, hey, here's the changes we need to make. Where the Office of Cannabis Management is like, okay, this is the law, we have to implement it now, right? Like they can't just be like, oh, I don't want to, right? Although in New York, it definitely it was an interesting process, we'll say to start. But like within Connecticut, the the regulatory system is under the Department of Consumer Protection, and then the Social Equity Council is under that as well. And so it is a different format, right? It's a different framework for it. And again, this was one of those things that, like, as people fought about the details, as the sort of unique situations that happened in each state came up, how it played out is very different. And not that one is necessarily better than other in totality, right? Like, but we can look at each one and be like, you did this really well, this part not so much, right? And I think analyzing the tri-state there, you'll find a lot of fascinating differences between them, both in good and bad.
Yeah, so we definitely have. That's so interesting about like Connecticut and how that works. We definitely have like
Everybody
our
forgets about Connecticut. I gotta remind everybody that like Connecticut happened, and it was a lot of Latinos that worked on making Connecticut happen too. That's like something that I want to make sure I emphasize. That like myself, I was one of the lead organizers and lead drafters of our equity program, but other folks that were Latino were part of that. So Lou Vega, who is somebody that was a hemp farmer that did turn eventually to adult use. Jocelyn Cerda now owns multiple businesses, and she's partnering with Shangri-La. And you have, Rafael Rosario is our communications person. And so we had a lot of amazing people in that space that were leading that show that deserve, their flowers.
nice. Right, it's always good to see like it's always good to have Hispanics. Yeah, the nature of Connecticut, I guess, diverse as well.
I mean, it's 10%, Connecticut is 10% Latino. Sorry, 10% Puerto Rican, right? Like, there's actually more than that. They're not the same. And so I always got to shout my buddy. Yeah, I even got a little Bad Bunny in the background just for this, just so everybody
Oh, there
knows.
you go. Yeah, there you go. So you can right. It's always like the thing about like the broad Hispanic thing that you have is like you're a Puerto Rican guy. Like I can be about Peru. The nature of like pan Hispanic thing variously works sometimes, not other times. Yeah, you want to talk to a Cuban, you might agree with a Cuban, you might fucking not.
Probably not, yeah.
Yeah, probably fucking
The
not.
Latinos
Indeed.
are not a monolith, right? Like there's
No,
definitely all
no.
kinds of folks. And here in Puerto Rico, we do have a medical program. It's relatively stable, right? Like, as far as medical programs go, and with rescheduling, since we only have medical, that's going to make an interesting adjustment. But we have a governor who like doesn't really care about the cannabis space. She's like not positive or negative on it, but is launching wars and like, working with Trump to do all these terrible things. And it is definitely, Puerto Ricans are not all lefties or progressives or anything like that at all. We are very purple people, I would say.
Yeah, no, that's it, right. That's interesting, right? No, you definitely get like conservative Cubans. Like Peru varies depending on who you talk to. Usually, somebody with a blue-eyed Peruvian like they can be very reactionary. No,
Yeah.
I'm a progressive guy and like understand like I don't like when my family's been fighting fucking tyranny for 100 years in different forms of fucking. I don't want any fucking white people to say banana republic about Peru, but like sometimes like you get like a shitty government, and now we see like Trump here, but then Trump is for cannabis, which is a weird thing and a weird transition segue to the Fed.
Yeah, yeah, for real.
So yeah, that's
So,
cool. No, that's interesting. I guess so. I guess like the equity thing is like the interesting thing. So we talked about. So we have like social equity. It was so specific where if you only had one misdemeanor, I don't think you can't. If you're only convicted of one misdemeanor but got off the other misdemeanor, I don't think you technically count as social equity. But then we have like, but then like it's always like an interesting thing. I guess like then like felony is also like another thing that definitely counted. And then we had like oh man, we have like impact zones and like it got complicated and like
yeah, Connecticut got
right
really
now
complicated too.
yeah. So like how does that work? How does that work with the council in Connecticut? And how does so and what is the definition there?
Okay, so it is complicated. There are impact zones, and you had to qualify for, I believe it was two out of the five of the qualifications, right? One, we did not get a criminal history qualifier in there, so actually whether you were arrested or not is not part of the
Oh
criteria.
damn.
And I was very, so like, the fascinating thing about like how these laws pass, right? Because we had an internal fight, should we kill this bill if it's not in it? Right? Like we definitely contemplated saying no to legalization just on the criminal history qualifier, but decided we should
Yeah.
move forward on legalization because we got so much in there that we really wanted and a lot of money. There was 60% of the tax revenue was going to go to community investment. And so to like shut the whole thing down over a definition was tough, right? And so we ended up moving forward, but there was disproportionate impact zones. Also, if you lived or went to school, like in an impact zone, so it was like 7 or 8 of your first 18 years had to be spent in this zone, or if you currently live there, but also that your income had to be below 200% of the median income, so you couldn't make too much, right? And then there was like 30 towns that were chosen that like if you spent this amount of time and you didn't make too much, like you could qualify as an equity applicant. And, it was not race-based at all, right? And that is also like a very particular decision, and folks talk about that a lot. I actually don't support that we have specific race-based qualifiers. Because like you were saying, you can get like a rich Puerto Rican that's like, well, I'm Puerto Rican, and so now I own a weed shop, right? That wasn't really what I was looking for. I was really looking for if you were arrested or served time specifically, you should have a leg up, whether you're black, brown, or white, right? Like, and yes, that means that we're including a lot of poor white folks in the equity programs, but only the ones that were impacted, right? And like, it would be disproportionately beneficial to black and brown communities because we were disproportionately policed. And so that definition and the conversation that still goes on to this day, how should we define equity, is an eternal debate. And I don't think at a national level we ever really came to one solid definition. But in Connecticut, it's more about income and location than criminal history or your race.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think we did have like an hours. I think we did have at one point money qualifiers. Like like there's always like the people like switch to the cracks and like politics is a difficult business that way. You're saying like you got to compromise to make progress, and like you didn't get what you wanted 100%, but you made progress. And like at the end of the day, in a long fight, you really want to call a victory, and then you get a victory, and then like that's life. You can keep fighting, and it's difficult the way we are keeping fighting for like home gardening and like making progress with bipartisan legislative sponsors, but then like, we still don't have it legally. But like there's only been like one guy caught and we helped him. Actually, he didn't even go to jail. God bless you, Phil. God bless Honey Grove Dave and Jeff for helping Phil in South Jersey. So that was like a whole like besides that guy, we hadn't heard about like a case in like a while either. So that's like the other like thing about gardening. And yeah, there's always it's so interesting like the nature of that. But how does the council work then?
How does the what work?
The equity council?
So the Equity Council has power over the community investment grants, right? It could also serve to make recommendations on a lot of other things. and ask the state for funding. But it doesn't generally, right, like fund any of the businesses directly. That happens through the Department of Consumer Protection. And there is no like equity funding for equity applicants, right? Like you are an equity applicant, you could get other types of support, but the Equity Council itself controls the community investment grants. That being said, it is the recommending body to the legislature as far as what changes need to be made to the legislation, right, or the statutes or the regulations. And so right now, Brian McGee, who's a former state representative, he is the executive director of the council, and he was actually one of the folks that worked with us in 2019 when we first had our debates on what legalization was going to look like, as he was chair of the African American caucus at the time. And so now he's leading that. They're starting to disperse the funds, but you have the same thing. You have an advisory council, and I believe there's like 17 people. I forget exactly how many. It changes all the time, right? But a number of folks, they don't have direct control over implementing anything, but they can make decisions around funding, where it's going to be going, are we approving this plan or that plan. They also review any of the community support plans by the businesses. So like one of the things is that businesses need a community impact plan to show how they're going to benefit the community. And those go before the social equity council. So if you're starting a dispensary, you have to say, well, we're going to support this school or this program or this senior citizens effort. And then they'll say, is this sufficient to get your license? And they give you a yes or a no. And then they also are there to follow up and say, did you actually follow through on your promises? And so it has a lot of different things. You know, it also like approved the map that was used to decide the disproportionately impacted areas. And that is now in the past, right? But like things like that can come up before the council. But then it's actually the executive director and the office that then implements those programs, and that's where Brandon McGee would come in.
Oh, nice. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, so it's like it's sort of
All this under the Department of Consumer Protection at the state level. Yeah.
yeah, so that's interesting versus like Jersey and how we do an advisory and then tracking money better.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we've definitely had some money go out here and there. It's always a thing of where the money going in Jersey. Like mostly, it's like we definitely have like good stories. Like the nature of like the of it's a long story.
Sure. Oh, yeah. And how it comes to be, right? Because like medical was already under the Department of Consumer Protection in Connecticut. And so that's, of course, like where adult use was going to fall under it. But it's more of a product regulatory agency, right, than like a social equity agency. And so there is some tension there if that makes sense for that department. But, you know, in other places, it's the Department of Revenue or different, you know, everywhere is a bit different. But in Connecticut specifically, I definitely think like we were focused a lot on the community investment, criminal justice reform. And of course, we spent a good amount of effort in the licensing and business side of it. But there was definitely some hiccups there as far as like whether it's working or not for the equity businesses now. And I think that's a big point of conversation, right? That we have to come back with the different equity, the architects of equity, right? And see what we're going to do now, especially now with rescheduling benefiting specifically the medical operators, and all, not all, but like just about all equity operators are in the adult use market. So that means if the medical market becomes the primary market, all the equity operators will be negatively impacted by that. And so figuring out how we can impact, adjust, shift, slow down, block, whatever we think makes sense when it comes to rescheduling is going to be a big conversation over the next few months. Because if we don't adjust it somehow, equity could be ran out of town by now ever expanding medical operators.
Right. So this is like an interesting thing with this like Schedule 3, moving it from Schedule 1 where it has no value medically to Schedule 3 we have some value here. And then it's like a weird process because like they definitely expedited it, but then there's a hearing in June. And it's like there's that process, and then like half the Republicans hate it and like they're suing to stop it. So it's like a weird thing that way. But you've been more on the forefront of that then.
Yeah, I've been pushing for descheduling, right, which is removing cannabis completely from the controlled substances list.
Yes,
And
that's what we're for. Yes.
right, and that, you know, as the Last Prisoner Project, you know, we've been pushing, and we were one of the lead organizers for Unity Week 2 years in a row. This last one, SSDP took it. But here's the thing, like rescheduling didn't actually reschedule cannabis. It only rescheduled medical products, like products that are approved through your state medical system. That means that cannabis is now in 2 different schedules. The plant and just like raw flower, or if you grow it your own, is still a Schedule 1 substance. products that are approved solely through the medical market are Schedule 3. Adult use products that you buy at the store, if you go to New Jersey and you buy an adult use product, not a medical operator at all, that is still a Schedule 1 offense. And so it is the first time where we see a product that's like bifurcated like that. Now, the weird thing is that if the medical products are in Schedule 3, because they have shown medical value, that directly undermines the idea that cannabis does not have medical value. And so now we're in a situation where the Controlled Substances Act itself is contradicting itself by having a product in multiple schedules. Now, this is, of course, not new that the federal government might contradict itself, right? Like that happens on a regular basis on lots of different issues. And here in Puerto Rico, cannabis is Schedule 2, actually, right? And so is cocaine, for example, and federally.
Yeah, cocaine is Schedule 2. That's like the whole thing is bullshit.
Cocaine is a plant medicine too, but that's a conversation for another day. But
like, that is actually in Peru, it's a coca leaf, but yeah, that is another conversation. That's another conversation. Speaking on weed, guys, just weed, here in America, coca leaves in Peru, maybe, but that's another story. So the fee scheduling is weird. It's so weird. And then, like, apparently there's an international treaty that, like, the fucking DEA has to be involved, and the DEA has to buy fucking weed, and then, like, there's a portal open. The whole thing is, like, insane because then it's, like, the fucking, of all the people that are the fucking feds, the goddamn DEA is the fucking feds. You want narcos? They're literally the narcos. They're literally the fucking narcs. It's the goddamn DEA.
Yes, and there's lots of evidence for that. What is it? Dark Alliance is a wild story, but like I think that rescheduling, as done through executive order under the Trump administration, is a very bizarre move. It is progress, I guess, right? Like it is I'll put it this way: it's the most progress we've seen in 50 years, but that's because we've seen no progress.
Yeah, because Joe Biden was moving at it slowly but surely, and then like it was too slow, and then now there's no Joe Biden in power anymore, one way or another. So like we got mixed bag. He was a fucking mixed bag, and now we have like a mixed bag here. But like, Biden was for like things that were like a hippie or people that like justice would also be for, versus Trump that doesn't like justice. Doesn't like hippie things? My God.
Trump doesn't like justice. That's definitely one way to put it. And so I think this is going to be a process that's going to go beyond this Congress into the next one. And, I still think it's unlikely that we get to a real decision because it is so complicated. It's possible. I don't know that legalization under Trump is going to be what we want legalization to be. It's probably likely to favor the larger operators.
Yeah.
Criminal penalties intact, right? And so, this is a political tension where the Democrats are not fighting for this and not really picking it up. Although shout out to Representative Ilhan Omar for definitely putting in the work and being supportive, and Dina Titus from Nevada, Congresswoman Dina Titus. And so now that Trump has done this, though, it is forcing the federal government to clarify rules, to engage with different agencies, to move forward on this hearing process, which we'll see if that actually happens. But it does force the federal government to have this conversation. And I think it's one of the best things that's coming out of this is that now we are in when will we move forward on this rather than if situation, and how do we want this to go? And so I am, thankful that this action happened. However, the immediate impact and the immediate benefit of the executive order are going to benefit very large medical operators only. To be very clear, it did not decriminalize the plant, right? Like if you're smoking weed in a park and it's like you can still go to jail. You can still, especially like say like a federal park, right? If you're in the Grand Canyon and they catch you smoking weed, that's a felony, and you can go to jail for many years. And so even after rescheduling, so it's creating an ever more confusing situation for your average person. And now we're in a very intense justice by geography situation where some states it's very legal, other states it's not. Some states have medical. Like if you're a regular person, you have no idea what's going on. And
well, that's why we have Heady and Jay and the Heady Chronicle here trying to
exactly. And we have, I think it's 40 medical states, right? So it is like most states have something going on. And then you have the hemp market, which is a whole other conversation too, where hemp
it is
legal now in the other 10 states as well. It's legal in all 50 states, and interstate commerce is legal, but this coming November, it will not be. And so we're going to see a rollback of the hemp provisions, which means we're going to recriminalize cannabis in at least 10 states. And for all the states that don't have adult use, you're going to see a vastly restricted market where at the same time the medical market might grow. So like, I don't know, it's all over the place of like how this is going to land, but it is creating a good opportunity for lawyers to clock lots of billable hours. I'll tell you that.
Wow. Yeah, yeah. The nature of these things gets complicated. Hemp is weird. Like it was like they sort of naturally legalized weed, but then like we fought here for cannabis, and I'm like, what the fuck is this? The whole hemp thing is is another story versus just like dispensaries and legacy weed, and then it's like,
It's one
uh,
plant and it has like 7 different legal designations.
oh yeah, no, it's always complicated that way. Like Jack
Can you
Herrera wrote
imagine
the
if like
Emperor.
tomatoes, right? Let's say were illegal in California, legal in Arizona, half legal in New Mexico, legal in Texas, but you can only have two at a time, legal in Atlanta and Georgia, but only if you grow it from home, but illegal in Florida completely, but legal in South Carolina if you get it from a particular person, but sort of only gummies in North Carolina, but then in Minnesota, it's only beverages, everything else is a felony, right? Like that's the world we live in right now where it's just all over the map.
Yeah, well, that's the catch about like America and the United States in like in the first place. Whenever you have to put the word "united" in the name, you're not that united, frankly. Like this, but that is like we can Jersey, we're making progress. Like, but this is the catch. It's like it goes both ways. We can make progress in cannabis in Jersey, and like fight Trump at the same time in theory, while like he's like not making progress in theory or like making weird progress. But then like other states like if we had like people fought Obama, the Republicans fought Obama, the Democrats are fighting Trump. On the local
Sure.
level, so it's always like an interesting thing that way. Like the
And
nature of the state.
had we had to all have the same policies, we probably wouldn't have had medical and adult use where it is today, right? We wouldn't
Yeah,
have
so
any.
that's like I think Peru operates that way, and like that's really hard if you're just trying to change like your neighborhood or your city or your like state in America. It's like you can't do that in Peru, and like
Yeah,
all the more reason like maybe we like America more. But then it's like if we wanted, but then like let's say like we're trying to free the last prisoner. The last prisoner is probably gonna be in a fucking red state with like hella time, so that's like hella difficult. And then if he's under state law, that's hella difficult versus like Biden and the oh my god, Biden and like the federal possession for or federal possession like change was like his biggest thing, but like so few people were really affected by it. But shout out to Chris Goldstein because he was caught by the Liberty Bell in Philly, which is a national park.
yep.
He was like one of the few people, and he was really hopeful about Kamala Harris and legalization. But
And
that's
you
not what
know,
happened.
the Biden pardons that you're mentioning, where it was thousands of people benefited, it didn't release anyone from prison, but it did help people that had records. You know, and you have to then get your record expired. A pardon doesn't erase your record. And I actually forgot to mention pardons, right? So a
Yeah, that
pardon.
was a good point actually to get into like the technicalities of freedom and pardons because I was getting a little confused there to say like Murphy pardoned Murphy commuted here in Jersey, but you were saying
So under clemency, you have a commutation, shortening the sentence. You have expungement, which is erasing the records. But a pardon is where the government says you have been forgiven for doing something bad, right? You can get a pardon in lots of different ways. And it is helpful. It often can come with a commutation also, right? Where you get the pardon, but it's basically saying that the government forgives your crime and that you can bring that to an employer or housing or to get a loan, right? That's like, don't count this against me. And you're much more likely to get that pardon. And it does help people. Like there's things about like housing and employment and jobs, right? Like those are important. That being said, when people hear the word pardon, they normally think they mean somebody is getting out of jail, and that's not exactly what happened under Biden. The weird thing is that Trump has actually released more people from actual commutations from prison than Biden did, because in his first term, he let roughly 13 out at the end of his term, and that's more in total than Biden did in his term. And
oh
now
fuck.
yeah, and so at the end of Biden's term, he did another round of pardons. There were some of our constituents that benefited from that. There were people that got free from Biden's pardon at the end, right? And so let me be very clear about that. And so it wasn't as many as Trump, but some did get released. But it was part of a broader effort. It wasn't specifically about cannabis. It was more a second chance kind of broader
Oh
determination.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well,
And
we could have
so,
a whole conversation about like the post George Floyd like social justice movement
sure.
and like the nature of that in DEI, which cannabis is concurrent, different periodically from.
And that's the thing that I was worried about was like you know, cannabis equity was separate but aligned with a lot of those efforts. But because the word equity became this like, demonized word, I was really worried that the federal government was going to crack down on equity specifically as a concept, right? And like it could go to the Supreme Court of like, our equity program is constitutional. And I do think that that's still a possibility, and it would be a wild conversation. And there are definitely arguments for and against it if it is or isn't constitutional. But when you have 10 different states doing it different ways, right? Like it's hard to say like what is equity to even like pin it down to like if it's constitutional or not. Because like Connecticut's program, you know, is probably more likely to be constitutional because of the way it's structured, where it doesn't have race as a factor. And so it is definitely debates that's going to have to happen at the federal level. We're going to have to debate, what does equity mean at the federal level? Are we going to have a federal equity program? Right? What is the benefits of that? What are the complications? Right? One of the things that's coming up with the rescheduling order is this registration process where medical entities can register with the DEA as a medical cannabis operator. And that will, in theory, make it possible for them to get a federal permit to operate. But the DEA is not being very clear with the details of both what the process is going to be, what are they going to do with the information. And so right now they're asking folks to disclose that they're committing a federal crime and information about their employees in order to register for a process that's unclear. And we don't know if the DEA is going to turn around and arrest those people.
Oh
We don't know.
yeah, they're gonna con people. This is entrapment.
You want me to send the DEA an admission of guilt? Like, and what are you gonna do with that? Right? And so
Yeah,
tense space, and like of course if you have $1 billion in your budget, you have less concern over it. But if you're a smaller operator that's a manufacturer or a grower, right, like sending the DEA a bunch of information of who you are, what you've been doing, admitting to guilt, here's my, like, that is a high bar of risk. But at the same time, if they don't do it, are they going to be outcompeted by the bigger operators that do end up in this system? Do we know if we're having a second chance at this, right? And maybe not. So it's a very tense time for folks that are currently trying to stay afloat and deciding what to do in that space. And I always recommend, like, you got to hire a lawyer to really explain to you what the details are of this, because there is a high risk and high potential opportunity. And also, there is the try to think of the opposite, right? Where it's just like an opportunity cost. If you don't register and your competitors do, and they're now able to work with the federal government and you are not, are you eventually going to get outcompeted because of that? And so it's
yeah,
a very difficult decision to make, but I encourage folks to find a qualified attorney to make the decision for you, where you can, have the right risk reward ratio that makes sense.
no, well, some of it makes sense, some of it makes no sense, some of it makes sense.
That's not a good way to explain federal policy in a nutshell. Well, some of it makes sense and some of it doesn't. So good luck.
Yeah,
But it is why
yeah,
we need full legalization at the federal level, right? Like that's why we need to pass things like the MORE Act or other bills that fully deschedule, so we can get around all this nonsense of it not being clear and just treat it like a plant and a product just like anything else.
yeah. That's a good point, and I think a good point to conclude our conversation here. A lot of good points, a lot of issues, a lot of.
Fantastic. Well, hey, Marilyn, it's been a pleasure. And again, I'm in Puerto Rico, but I am a Connecticut native, so always down to come support New Jersey and all the good stuff that they do. And definitely check out the Last Prisoner Project if you're interested in criminal justice reform. We're at lastprisonerproject.org. And then if you're a Latino in Jersey or anywhere else, and you want to connect with our efforts on the immigration and Latino support within the equity space, we are the LatinoCannabisAlliance.org. Feel free to reach out to us. Always looking for more Latino folks to work with. And either way, I'm going to be seeing you in the streets or in the state house or near you real soon, and happy to be a part of this community. Thank you, Dan, for the time and the interview, and looking forward to working with you and your audience, however it makes the most sense, so that we can finally, once and for all, end the ridiculous war on cannabis users, free all the prisoners, make sure the people that are impacted benefit from the legalization, and that our kids don't have to do all of this work that we had to do to undo a ridiculous law. But we're getting there. We're making progress. Not quite there yet, but that's where your audience comes in. Help us finish the job.
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt. Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, everybody go to headynj.com, heady_NJ on social media for us. And thank you very much.
Si se puede.